Welcome back to Red Cedar Radar. I know that we were gone last week. I was a little bit under the weather, but we're back and better than ever this week. I have two special guests with me, Paul and Brendan, who both have been on the pod before in different capacities. Today we're going to break down everything MSU football, and then at the end of our episode, Paul's going to do a little bit of a throwback to March Madness and kind of talk through his March Madness predictions and kind of how everything shook out for him this year. Paul, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. It's been a fun week. Fortunately, it was a quiet news weekend, so we don't need to worry about that so much. But it's been good. Had some snowflakes in the air for May 1st, which is fun. So another spring in Michigan. It's beautiful.
Brendan, what about you?
Doing good. I mean, like Paul said, there's no news this weekend, really. It's kind of might be a good thing that we postponed it to this week, so now we can talk about all that notable news.
Very true. My sickness was well timed.
If
Okay,
there's
so I
such a thing
really,
as that, yeah.
yeah, I know, yeah. I really want to get into stuff that's been happening with the transfer portal. So first, let's talk Payton Thorne. Entered the transfer portal. There's not been too many details about, his reasoning behind it all. He's kind of kept that quiet. I don't know, whoever wants to start with their opinions on this decision by our last year's starting quarterback. Paul, how
I,
about you?
I guess I'll go
Sorry.
first. Yeah, I think there certainly is a lot of rumors out there about why he made the decision. Whether it be he was miffed that he wasn't automatically named the starting quarterback next fall, or maybe the quarterback competition wasn't going as well as he'd hoped, or maybe there was some sort of NIL situation, or maybe there was some sort of locker room drama. And I think that's just one of those things that we'll never know. And there's probably tidbits of all of those things that might have some truth to them. So that's really just kind of between him and his family. And ultimately at the end of the day, he did decide to transfer, and so it seems unlikely that he'll come back. I mean, we already had one player that put his name in and then pulled it back out in Chuck Brantley, which is a good thing, I think. And I guess we'll talk about him a little bit later, probably. But as far as Payne goes, honestly speaking, having seen the spring game, I think he was the leader. I do expect that he was going to be the number one quarterback this fall. But I also saw some good things out of Noah Kim, and I think other people did as well. And by all accounts, that quarterback competition was very close. And I think there was definitely the risk, or at least the possibility, that we were going to see some split time in the fall. That's what I thought was going to happen, is that maybe we'd see a situation not unlike what we saw in Ann Arbor last year, where we had the established quarterback and Cade McNamara, and then almost splitting starts with the young up and comer that wound up winning the job in J.J. McCarthy. And of course, not to compare those four players to each other, but I think the situation had the potential to play out that way. And if you're a guy that started for 2 years, that's not fun. You feel like you've sort of done enough to earn that job. And also, one thing that came out of the spring game is that Thorne had mentioned that he had been injured most of last year. And so, does that play into some of his deficiencies last year? Probably. So yeah, I can maybe see that, and that he would be frustrated, and he obviously took a lot of heat from the fans as well, and that's never fun. So yeah, it is what it is at this point. So I don't know, Brandon, if you had any other comments to add to that.
Yeah, I liked your comparison between Thorne and kind of last year, Cade McNamara and JJ McCarthy over down in Ann Arbor, but I think Thorne's kind of going into business for himself. I think he was a serviceable Big Ten quarterback. He wasn't great by any means, but I think he was serviceable, especially in 2021. Obviously, last year struggled a lot with injuries. So I think he's just looking for a fresh start. I don't think it's anything really deeper than that. Uh, but yeah, so I think fresh start. NIL money is obviously huge, but he's going to explore his options. His name's been linked to Auburn. Uh, so I just, Thorne, it's not the biggest loss in the world, but at the very least, you're losing quarterback depth. Whether he would have started this year or not, at the very least, that's what you're losing is quarterback depth. But it's not like Michigan State has an awful backup in Noah Kim, or even Kate Hauser can jump in. Obviously, he's inexperienced, but I don't think it's the worst loss for Michigan State losing Thorne. And he could come back. I personally doubt it. I don't think he's going to withdraw his name, but there's still that possibility that he withdraws his name like Brantley did.
Well, that was kind of my thought also, because Peyton Thorne, that news came in first, and I was kind of like, whoa, wasn't expecting it, but like, okay, we have some backups. There's been some competition already. Like, I think we'll be fine. The next one that we're going to talk about shocked me way more than Peyton Thorne, and maybe that was just me being naive about it all and not really knowing what was going on, but Keon Coleman also has entered his name into the transfer portal. Talk to me, Paul, we can start with you again, a little bit about your thoughts on when that came through and if it was a shock to you or not, because it definitely was to me.
I mean, both of those decisions were, and all three, if we include Brantley, I didn't expect any of that. I know there were a few other people that are more plugged into some more direct player level gossip that knew something was brewing. I'm not one of those people. But yeah, I was very surprised that Coleman entered his name because he was very clearly going to be the number one receiver and, frankly, the featured player on, you could argue, the entire team. And so the fact that he's opting to leave was very much a surprise. And again, the reasons why he made that decision, I mean, ultimately he's making a decision that he feels is in his best interest, probably to go to the NFL draft. Um, and it's probably no more simple or complicated than that. And of course, a lot of things fit into that. If he got a better NAL offer, so to speak, whether tampering was involved, I'm not sure any of that honestly matters. Like, it's just the reality of college football these days. But yeah, that's a big surprise, and he is going to be harder to replace because I don't think we have another receiver with his skill set. You know, the combination of size and length and speed, that's tough to replace, either on the roster or with the portal. So that's going to be a big hit. That concerns me
So,
more than Thorne.
Brendan, a question for you. You know, like we just saw with Brantley, he came back, and I know that there's been like tons of speculation about Coleman, and with the Peyton Thorne decision, is that make him more likely to come back? What's your opinion on all of that kind of gossip that's been happening?
Yeah, so I guess a tool that other programs used to kind of get Keon out of East Lansing was, hey, Thorne, he's not a great quarterback. He can kind of tank his Keon's NFL draft stock because if you have an improved quarterback, good quarterback play can make a receiver look better. So that was kind of the argument for Keon entering the portal and for him leaving Michigan State to go to another school, whatever it may be. Uh, Will he come back after the Thorne news? It's a slim chance, I personally think, because it's just hard for Michigan State to compete head on with the likes of LSU, USC, Tennessee, you name them. I mean, it's going to be hard for Michigan State to beat them NIL wise, because all those programs have better quarterback play than Michigan State currently does right now. So in my opinion, I think Keon's gone, and he was the biggest loss of this offseason so far, including some of the guys that have gone to the NFL draft, in my opinion, just because he's such a good athlete. Paul mentioned his size, his length, his speed. He can win jump balls with relative ease. So I think Keon's the biggest loss of this offseason for Michigan State, assuming he goes to another program.
Yeah, I would agree. And now I want to talk about Brantley, and I have a different type of question with this before we kind of break down his decision to go. And then, so obviously we know that he went kind of just a little while after the other two. Talk to me, and this is just kind of a question that I want to know your opinions about. What does that do to a team when someone decides to leave and then comes back? Do you think everyone just welcomes them with open arms, or do you think there's a little bit of a change in the dynamic of things when someone does that? And this is just speculation. I'm just curious about what you both think.
Yeah, I think it depends on the culture of the team. That really just tests the culture of the team. If you have a team that's kind of on the brink, maybe that'll put them over the edge. Like I remember Arizona State, I think it was last in the 2021 season that their quarterback entered the portal, Jaden Daniels it was, and the locker room was kind of torn apart. Coach was fired the next season. I mean, it was just chaos in at Arizona State. So, but it just tests the culture to me. It like the team is greater than the player. That's what's tested when these players enter the transfer portal. Obviously, we saw on social media Sunday night when Thorne, Brantley, and Keon after they all entered the portal, a lot of them took to social media. I saw Brule, Noah Kim. They posted, "Hey, Spartan fans, let's relax. We'll get this handled. Everything's going to be fine." I think that's a good testament to what Mel Tucker's building at Michigan State and the culture he has. So I think just entering the portal, coming back, or withdrawing your name. I think that just really tests the culture.
Paul, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with what Brendan said, and I think it is going to be kind of case by case based on the exact dynamics and how that player is perceived by his teammates, what the exact situation was, why he left, why he decided to come back, and that really could run the gambit of a lot of different things. I will note we did have one player, as I recall, that did the same thing last season, Ben Van Suberen, and he put his name in the portal, but then changed his mind and came back and wound up having a very productive senior year. So, could Brantley do the same thing? I think that's certainly possible. I would think that probably it's not going to be a major factor, but again, it just depends on the exact situation in the locker room, which is hard to say right now.
Connor Hayward did that too. He entered the
Yeah,
portal, came back,
that's
and
right.
had very productive last season as a Spartan. So
I think you're right. It does just depend. That was something that when I saw his announcement that he was coming back, I just wondered, what those conversations are like with his teammates. Obviously we'll never know. So overall, I just want to know your opinions on should people feel a, a sense of panic a little bit with those decisions? Where does that leave the team kind of without those two? And things kind of a little bit seemingly in turmoil, but I think it's calming down a little bit as we're recording now. But what is your opinion? Should fans panic?
Well, I never advocate for fans panicking. I think that, well, if you're a Colorado fan, you might want to panic then. But this situation, yeah, I mean, it was a big Sunday, losing possibly your two best players on offense and one of your starters on defense, at least for a little while. That's a big deal. And so the way I view it, like, there's certainly a range of emotions between, this is fine, that this is fine, dog, and MSU football is dead. Like, we're somewhere in the middle there, clearly, and I would lean more towards the less panic. Now, if you were stock trading and you were looking at Michigan State's stock price, I think it went down a little bit, um, and I think that's more due to Coleman, as we've discussed, than Thornton. I think, or Thorne rather. I think we can kind of mitigate the loss of Payton mostly. Coleman, that loss is harder to absorb. But I mean, fundamentally, the team is going to be different in the fall than we expected. And most likely, that means it's going to be a little bit less talented. Now, that may or may not translate into fewer wins. I've seen a lot of speculation of, how much is, the loss of Coleman worth in wins and losses. And, some folks are like, oh, this could turn an 8-5 team into a 5-17, or an 8-4 and 5-7. I don't think the swing is that big. I mean, one player is not probably worth more than half a win at the most. And I think, Justin Thind actually over on 247, as I recall, had some data that backed that up. I haven't studied it, so I can't really say. But does the fact that MSU will need to play differently, there is a scenario where that might even be better. Like, that's a very optimistic take, but like, college football is a weird game. That's, you got 18 to 22-year-olds playing with an oblong ball that takes weird bounces. Things can happen. And frankly, stuff like injuries to other positions is probably going to be a bigger impact than it will be to losing one player. So don't panic.
yeah, I mean, if losing three players to the portal causes the fan base and maybe even within the program to hit the panic button, then you have depth issues. That's just the way
Yes.
it is. It goes beyond the transfer portal. That goes in high school recruiting too. So if Michigan State fans are panicked, the program's panicking, then there's depth issues. Players at every single program have entered the portal this year. I mean, it happens all the time. Michigan's had starters, Alabama's had starters enter the portal, Georgia's had starters enter the portal. It happens. It's just what happens nowadays in college football. You can like it or not. It's just what happens. People go into business for themselves. So it's not time to panic for Michigan State. To me, this season, and also trophies are won in the fall. They're not really won on May 1st or whenever the April 30th is when they enter the portal. So what happens on the field in the fall is the most important thing. And I think this year's a prove it year for Mel Tucker. This year is the most important year in Mel Tucker's tenure because after an unexpected great season in 2021, winning 11 games, winning the Peach Bowl, then an unexpectedly not so good season last year, 2022, they go 5-7, lose to Michigan, lose to Ohio State, lose to Penn State. Can he find that happy medium? Can he establish some consistency? And which one was kind of like the fluke? I don't like to use the term fluke for an 11 win season, but which one's the normal? The normal season, I guess. So to me, It's not time to panic, Michigan State. It's not.
You kind of touched on what my next kind of point in question or topic of conversation was going to be. The culture of college sports has really changed with NIL and the transfer portal being used more. So many people that talk about it dislike the changes. They don't like, kind of, as you mentioned, like people going into business for themselves. I feel like it's a really important piece of how things run over the past couple years, and definitely what we've seen this year. What are your guys' opinions on like this shift of culture that we've seen in college football since NIL has kind of picked up more? What do you think about it? Paul,
Yeah,
you can start, or Brendan. Go
on
ahead.
one
You
side
Sorry.
go
you
ahead,
can
Brent.
one side you can say, okay, I don't like these kids being able to control how much they're getting paid and use that as leverage to enter the transfer portal and then have schools competing to, I guess, recruit them out of their current school. I mean, I see that aspect of it, but also you can look at the other side and say, I don't think TCU would have made the national championship game or the college football playoff last year if it wasn't for the transfer portal. They recruited a ton of guys out of the portal. They had a first-year head coach last year. They made it all the way to the national championship game, won a semifinal game as well against Michigan. So you could look at it both ways. I think it creates more parity in college football, the transfer portal does, but it puts a lot of pressure on the students, the student athletes, I should say, because they're being paid a lot of money. And if you're being paid money, you got to expect to be treated as an employee. Look at Deion Sanders. He's telling kids to get out of Colorado if they're not good enough because because their collective is paying them, paying the players. So if they're not performing, then they got to go. That's just the way it is nowadays. The players are being treated as employees. But they also kind of can see the benefits of it. They earn money. They can kind of use that as leverage, especially the best players, to go to bigger programs. And yeah, so I just think it's a new world of college football, good or bad.
Yeah, and I agree with all of those things. I think that in general, the kind of instant transfer rule once is, it does cause instability, but in general, it's fair. And also with NIL, like let's be honest, players have been getting paid a lot longer than just 2 years ago. Now there's an official mechanism where kids can make money on, and I think the name, image, and likeness model is very fair. Um, but I also think we're in a little bit of a Wild West phase now where things are not quite settled. The dust is not quite settled. And so it is a phase of instability. But, it kind of is what it is. Like, this is the reality of the situation. And you can complain about it, but at the end of the day, that, you got to deal with it. And so I do think that this will settle out. I kind of wonder if there's maybe more money in the system now that, so from just kind of a pure economic standpoint, like at some point people are going to get tired of throwing money at these kids that haven't proven anything. And so I kind of wonder if that's going to settle down. Um, but then ultimately, I kind of like Tom Izzo's take on this, which is if he's asked about the portal or NIL, his statement is it really better for the players? And I think it is generally positive for the players, but, for some kids, it's not. The thought being that, like, having more freedom, having more choices is good, but having kind of unlimited freedom for an 18-year-old is maybe not always good. So I think Tom's got some good points there that can be listened to, but I think ultimately we'll sort of find a happy medium where things kind of level out. And I do think the playing field is more leveled, and that's good for college football, quite frankly. So I think it's in general positive, but there'll be some rough patches here or there as we go. Just growing pains.
Yeah, I agree with those takes. I feel like we saw very recently the growing pains and the instability and what that can do. And I think that brought out those, oh, this isn't good. I don't like this new setup feeling in a lot of people. But then when your team benefits from it and we bring in someone that is going to make a change and will be a good pickup, then you see the other side of the coin. And I feel like, as with everything, everyone overreacts when it's something that isn't going the way that you want it to go. So I just was curious what your thoughts were on it. Okay. So moving on, I want to talk about the spring game, which was a long time ago, but I was sick and, whatever. So you both were there at the spring game and you kind of had your own duties and things to watch while you covered the game or the practice or whatever it was. Brendan, I want to start with you. Both of their articles that they wrote for Spartans Illustrated will be linked in the bio, and we're going to kind of talk about some of the points that they put out after being there for the spring game, but I kind of just want an overview of your thoughts based off those articles. So, Brendan, you covered the defense. Give me some points from what you saw.
Yeah, I thought the defensive line struggled a little bit. I thought during the 2 minute drills and during the live scrimmaging, I thought the offensive line got a lot of good push, and Paul will probably touch on that. But in terms of players to watch out for this season who are going to contribute, Avery Dunn, Brandon Wright along the defensive line, those two will be at defensive end a lot this season. Simeon Barrow, Maverick Hansen will be at defensive tackle. Those two guys will play a lot this year. Then Texas A&M transfer Tunmise Adeleye. I think he's going to play a lot. He might be a starter, might rotate in with the twos. Uh, so he's definitely an impact player to watch out for. Got to remember he's still young. I think he's a redshirt freshman or maybe a redshirt sophomore. Not 100% sure, but he's still a young player. Uh, Obviously, we didn't see some of the guys along the defensive line who were injured, like Chris Bogle, Jarrett Jackson, I believe, is injured. Zion Young. So didn't get the full picture of the defensive line, but those are just some names to watch out for. At linebacker, I think Cal Halliday had the best performance out of anyone on the field, offense or defense, during the spring game. I mean, there was one play, he lit up a block, I think by Tyneal Hopper, and then he pushed Hopper into Carter, who was running the football, and just destroyed the play. So I like what I saw from Cat Halliday. I think he's going to be the leader of that defense, best player on that defense. But alongside him at linebacker, Aaron Boulet's back. Jacoby Windman, he lined up in the 2 minute drill. I think all the snaps of the 2 minute drill that he participated in, he lined up at at edge rusher. So I think it'll be interesting to see if he plays more outside linebacker or more edge rusher this season. So he saw time at a little bit of both, but when Min's at edge rusher, I think you can expect to see Brule mix in at linebacker alongside Halliday. I thought Jordan Hall looked good as well. He's a true freshman, 4-star guy, so he's one to watch out for. I don't think he'll get a ton of time this year, but he's definitely one for the future for Michigan State. Obviously, some injuries. Darius Snow wasn't playing. Ma'ad Gott, he got injured during the live scrimmage, so hopefully he's able to recover by the time the season starts, or hopefully by fall camp. Uh, in terms of the secondary, obviously it was good that Brantley's now back on the team because MSU can use all the help that they can get in the secondary at the cornerback position. But Chester Kimbrough, Justin White look to be the ones right now. Obviously, Brantley is probably the best corner on the team, but he didn't compete in the live scrimmaging portion of the spring game. Angelo Gross is also a name to watch out for. I really liked redshirt freshman Caleb Coley. I think he's going to blossom into a really good player over the next couple of years. As for safeties, Malik Spencer played a lot of safety. Jaren Mangum is going to step into a bigger role this year. He's a sophomore now. I expect him to be top safety on the team this year, but the safety position is very young because Malik Spencer's a sophomore. Khalil Majid, who also had a lot of time at safety, I believe he's a redshirt sophomore. So the safety is a very young position. Obviously, Xavier Henderson's gone from last year, so it'll be interesting to see how those guys develop.
Sorry. Anything that you did not like that you saw from the defense?
Yeah, I don't want to say I was underwhelmed with the defensive line, but I think they have some work to do. Obviously, they weren't fully healthy, but like I said before, I think the offensive line kind of had control during the 2 minute drills. The offense was able to do what it wanted to. There were in the 2 minute drills, one was led by Thorne, one was led by Kim at quarterback. Both of them scored touchdowns. I think one was only 5 snaps, the other was 6 snaps. So I don't want to say it was an easy drive, but I think the defensive line could put a little bit more pressure on the quarterback. I think that was something that I guess I don't want to say concern, but was just something to note of during the spring game.
Okay, and my last question, and you kind of already touched on this a little bit, but choose one player from the defense that's your most exciting player right now.
I think it's Cal Halliday. I think he's the best player in the defense, leader at the linebacker position. Obviously, he's a junior now. I mean, so he's got plenty of experience, 2 years of experience. So I think Cal Halliday is definitely the best player in the defense player to watch this season.
Okay, so moving on to offense, Paul, that was kind of your area to watch. Give me kind of a breakdown of what you saw, and then I'll ask you who your most exciting player is right
Okay. Well, as Brendan mentioned, we were watching from up in the press box, which was very much kind of controlled chaos to watch down on the field. And so I actually had to go back and rewatch the broadcast a couple of times, and I actually tried to chart plays, which was not super effective, but I think it did help me try to understand what I had thought I had seen in real time. But just to kind of go through, briefly, kind of position by position. I mean, we already talked quite a bit about the quarterback position, and my take coming out of the spring game, was very much that, um, Payton Thorne was the leader in the clubhouse, and I felt like he kind of played like it, like he sort of played like he was, the horse at the front of the race that was just trying not to lose, more or less. But that sort of speaks to sort of his game manager type, persona, which now doesn't really matter. Whereas Noah Kim, I think, felt like, the more aggressive of the three. I think he also wound up playing the most snaps, as it turned out. And he sort of both had the most impressive plays on the day. He had a couple really nice throws, but he also was maybe the bigger risk taker. So he sort of felt like the quarterback that was sort of higher risk, but higher reward potentially long term. Which is why I thought that he wouldn't win the job, but he might still get some meaningful snaps. Now we appear to be full on in Noah Kim season, so he looks like the leader in the clubhouse to me, because we did see quite a bit from Caton Hauser. I know he got a lot of buzz, but he honestly didn't get a lot of snaps with the first team offense, and he looked like a freshman to me. I mean, he's a redshirt freshman. He made a couple throws again to like a third string tight end against the third string defense, but like, what does that really tell you? So, I think there was some buzz that he had a really good first scrimmage. None of us saw that, so it's really hard to pin any sort of hopes or faith on something that we've never seen. So, I mean, I guess we'll see. I mean, I don't doubt that he'll be a good quarterback eventually in his career, but he does look like he looks young, quite honestly. Um, so then the running backs, I think we honestly didn't see a lot of running backs. Like they seem to be more pass focused than run focused. Coming in, I was most interested to see what Nathan Carter looked like. He again had kind of a lot of buzz. And the weird thing was that in real time, as I was watching from the press box, my impression was that Carter had the best afternoon and he was the potential number one. But when I went back through and tried to chart the plays, that was not what I saw, which I thought was weird. And I don't know if Brent, I might actually have to ask Brendan's opinion on this, because when I went through and charted it, Jalen Berger, who came out with the first string offense in the sort of 2 minute drill, he actually looked like he put up the best stats to me, based on what I could tell. And again, it's very kind of, it's not as precise as I'd like to be, but, doing the best you can to chart it. He seemed to have the best afternoon. Like he seemed to have several long runs. And then Jaren Mangum actually looked like the number two back to me. And again, he came out with a second string offense. So that kind of tracked. Now, will Carter, look more impressive in the fall as he gets more acclimated to the system? Maybe so. I mean, we also saw Davion Prim and Jordan Simmons. They didn't get a lot of work, so that's kind of hard to evaluate. But one thing I would note is that they did seem to incorporate more kind of throws to the running back out of the backfield as kind of checkdowns. Now, whether that was just a product of the somewhat strange format of the event or not is hard to say, but that was maybe something to keep an eye out for. Now, speaking of throwing the ball, the wide receiver position, Keon Coleman actually, he was on the sidelines, but I don't recall ever seeing him take a snap, certainly in any of the sort of scrimmage-like portion of the event, whether it was anything close to 11 on 11. So that led you with Trey Mosley, who is most likely going to be the number one receiver in the fall, pending any additions from the portal. He looked fine. I mean, I think Trey Mosley is sort of that, kind of steady receiver. He's maybe underrated. He's solid. He's a solid Big Ten wide receiver. Is he ready to be the number one option? I kind of am concerned. I think he might be a little bit of a, he's got a little bit of role player in him. Like, he reminds me in a strange way of Gabe Brown on the basketball team, where Gabe was great as your third option and maybe not as good as your first option. And that's, that just is what it is. And then beyond him, I think Christian Fitzpatrick and Montori Foster look like, they both had a couple loud plays here or there. Those are probably the next two receivers on the depth chart. There was a question before which one was number three. And I think that, I thought Fitzpatrick looked like he was taking more snaps, like he was a little higher on the depth chart, but other people had different opinions on that. And then there's another veteran, Cade McDonald, that also appeared kind of strangely often with the number one offense. And then there's a lot of young guys. There's a lot of receivers to choose from. Some of the younger guys include, Antonio Gates Jr. and Jerron Glover and Tyrell Henry. Each of them had at least one catch, and then Antonio Gates had a couple really nice plays, really nice catches from Kim to end the scrimmage that were quite impressive. And his dad, I believe, played in the Final Four and in the NFL. So, you know, that's better than not, I guess. So it looks like there's potentially some talent in the wide receiver position room, but it's not a lot of tested, established talent, and I don't think we have another Keon Coleman that's hiding there somewhere that we just didn't see. Um, so we'll see if one of those players will emerge, but it looks like it's wide receiver by committee going forward. And then I'll just to say a few things about tight ends. I think MSU aspires to be a team that has, a tight end that they use for both blocking and pass catching. That's what they aspire to be. That's kind of the DNA of the program. I don't know if we're really going to see that. I think we saw a little bit more of a finesse tight end operation is what I would describe it. I mean, Malik Carr is clearly the number one tight end. He's really the only returning tight end with any significant playing time. He was out there a lot, but I think he's definitely still more of a pass catcher than a blocker. Um, as far as a blocking tight end, I did see Evan Morris out there, he might even be a former walk-on. I would have to check that. But he seemed to, in some of the run plays, he seemed to be out there more than often than not. And then there's a lot of new players. There's Tyrell Hopper, that was the Boise State transfer that, as Brendan mentioned, got blown up by Cal Halliday on one play, as I recall. There's Jalen Franklin, who was a Wisconsin transfer. There's a redshirt freshman named Michael Masunis. There's Jack Nickel, who was also a redshirt freshman. There's a four-star true freshman, Brendan Parachek. We all saw them out there. We saw even a Norfolk State transfer, Adamala Fallier, they all got kind of equal time, honestly speaking, but they all seemed like they were kind of in that mode of more of a pass catching tight end. So I don't know if we have that, kind of what fans would expect to see from a Michigan State tight end is a guy that can block, but also can go out and catch a pass and get behind the defense and, stretch the seam a bit. I don't know if we have that. Although I will say I think that they utilized the tight end in some interesting formations. Like they were doing a lot of H-back formations with a tight end, much like they used to use Connor Haywood. Again, they did try to use the tight ends quite a bit in the passing game. So we may see some more creative uses of the tight ends to maybe make use of the skill set that we have this year. So that'll be interesting to see. And then finally, on the offensive line, it was pretty well established who your kind of first string, second string, third string is. And, the first string is basically the players that all saw a reasonable amount of work last year. And so it looked like that's going to be, Baldwin, Duplain, Nick Samak at center, Gino Vandemark, who's maybe the newcomer at right guard, and then Spencer Brown at right tackle. And I looked that up real quick, and those five players have almost 3,000 combined snaps in last year. So that's good. But there's an old Judd Heathcote saying that the good news is everybody's back, but then the bad news is also that everybody's back. So, is this offensive line talented enough to play winning football in the Big Ten? I'm not sure. There are some potential players behind them. I think maybe the most interesting player on the line is there's a JUCO transfer, Keyshawn Blackstock, who looked pretty good at left tackle. We could maybe see him more. We also had Evan Brunning. Dallas Fincher was clearly the backup center. Kevin Wiggerton, who's a sophomore, and Ethan Boyd at left tackle was the backup left tackle. We'll probably see a lot of, I think the intention is to play 7 or 8 guys pretty regularly on the offensive line as rotation. So we'll see probably those, some subset of those 10 guys rotate through pretty often. And again, I feel like it's been a while since we've really seen consistent offensive line play out of the Spartans. Will we see it this year? I'm not sure. But at least they seem healthy this year, which is not something we could have said last year, as I recall. So that's kind of the rundown from all the different 5
So
position
out of
groups, I
all
guess.
of those guys, pick one that is the most exciting for you to watch, which might be difficult, but you can do it.
I think I'm going to take a little bit of a flyer on Antonio Gates Jr. We did see him very briefly, I say at the end of the scrimmage. I know that he had quite a bit of buzz when he committed to the Spartans. So it's kind of my dark horse candidate for a breakout player with very little actual X and O knowledge of football. I'm going to go with
I
Gates
love it.
Jr.
Why
Why not?
not? With everything that's happened recently, I think a off the wall pick is okay for this. Give the people someone else to kind of look into a little bit more. Okay. Any other things that you want to say about the spring game? I feel like those were really some comprehensive rundowns. And like I said, their articles are going to be linked in the bio, wherever you're listening to the pod. So you can check those out, hopefully, and read a little bit more. But anything else you guys want to say at all about that?
Yeah, another name that Paul mentioned was Jaren Mangum. He's the running back transfer from South Florida.
Mm.
I think he's a great pickup, great contrast to what Berger brings to the table at the running back position and what Carter's going to bring to the table. I think he's like 20, 30 pounds heavier than the both of them. He's a big bruiser back. He can run over people on the defensive side. So I think Mangum's a really good running back, but obviously that a lot of that still falls on the offensive line. They got to improve. I happen to think they will this year. Obviously, not many injuries yet. Hopefully that stays the same. I think Coach Cap, the offensive line coach for MSU, I think he's really confident in the group. And I think that because they haven't really pursued anyone too serious in the transfer portal yet at the offensive line position. I mean, if you're looking at who they're kind of trying to pursue in the transfer portal, looking at wide receiver and you're looking at the secondary. So I'm confident. I think the offensive line will improve this year. And in turn, I think Michigan State has a good balance of running backs that they can rely on in Berger, in Carter, and in Mangum.
Anything from you, Paul?
I would agree with that. I think the wide or the running back position is interesting, and I think they potentially have three good backs there. I'll just comment that Brandon and I we went above and beyond a little bit. We also tried to scout the kickers and the punters before the event actually started. There was only one of each, and I forgot to write down their names. But the punter looked pretty good, as I recall. He was booming some kicks, so he's no Bryce Behringer, I don't think, but we saw some potential there. And did we see any field goal attempts even in the
I
before
don't.
that started?
I think
I don't remember.
Rusnak was out there kicking Steven Rusnak, who's returning from last year,
Yeah,
because
yeah, you're
MSU
right.
still has a kicker and a punter that are still coming in the summer from the transfer portal. So we'll kind of wait and see on those kind of battles there. But Eckley was the punter we saw. He was consistently punting the ball out like
That's
40, 45 yards. So obviously he's not Behringer, but still not bad from what we saw on what was that, April 15th, a while ago. So yeah, I don't think punting
something like that.
is a big concern.
I was just looking at your articles, and one of you, I think it was you, Brendan, had dropped in some tweets, and one of them was like on this really sunny day in April, and I just like looked out the window a minute ago, and it's like disgusting and snowy
Yeah,
today. So very different times, but I think
it
that was
should
a
pick
really.
up this weekend.
I
The
hope
weather
so.
should pick up this weekend. So
I hope that is a comprehensive enough of a rundown as far as football goes. I don't think you could find that anywhere else. We'll have more football news to talk about, but right now, kind of want to turn things over to Paul for a second, just to talk March Madness, because any excuse to talk basketball, I'll jump on it. Um, Tell me a little bit about how things shook out for you with your March Madness predictions, Paul, and kind of walk us through excuse me, kind of walk us through a little bit about how you personally came out at the end of March Madness.
Sure, Sydney. And I think this is my chance to flex a little bit. Was the comment that I made because the last time I was a guest on the show, I went through my detailed bracket predictions with Sydney, and as it turned out, I had kind of a dark horse pick of taking the number 4 seed Yukon Huskies out of the West region to win the whole tournament. And as it turned out, they did. So I feel pretty good about that. I did win my office pool, so I got a little bit of change in my pocket for that, which is always nice. And I think I finished in the 99.9th percentile on ESPN. So it's still like 15,000th place, but I like 200 million or so. That's still pretty good. So yeah, that was good. My sort of math-based methodology worked pretty good. As I say, the West region I almost pegged exactly, including getting Kansas correctly predicting Kansas to go down to Arkansas. Um, and I did change my pick slightly to what I discussed with you, Sydney, but I actually did have Gonzaga and uh, UConn in that regional final. So that region looked good for me. Um, the I had a couple teams that was the only Final Four team I had, but there was some other teams I knocked out early that did go out early, like Arizona and Purdue, although they went out earlier than even I thought they would. I talked a lot about Purdue doing Purdue things, and they did the most Purdue thing ever and losing to a 16 seed. Um, the San Diego State was a team that I had mentioned as a potential sleeper. I just didn't really trust the Mountain West, so I was very hesitant to take them as far as they went. And as those that watch the tournament carefully might remember, before San Diego State won their first game, there was talk about how the Mountain West had lost like 10 or 15 or some obscene number of games straight in the tournament. Like they were on a very big losing streak, and then San Diego State went on a bit of a run there. So obviously, I did also pick Creighton as a sleeper in the I believe the South region. That turned out to be true. Um, and then in MSU's bracket in the where were we, the East? Yes, in the East. I had Tennessee going fairly far. I had taken Florida Atlantic over Purdue, but they didn't. They clearly went farther than I suspected, and I did have MSU over Marquette. So I did a lot of things right. I had Kentucky winning that bracket, which didn't work out for me, unfortunately. And but I had MSU stopping at the Sweet 16. So really, the only thing that the math didn't really get right was Miami's run to the Final Four. I still had them going out in the first round, which I still think should have happened, but you can't win them all. So yeah, I felt pretty good about that, even though I just had one Final Four team. That was the math was more right than it was wrong this year, which is always
Something
nice.
that, since I was sick, I never talked with anyone about was the whole AJ Hogard saga of having his name kind of thrown in and nobody knowing. Any opinions on that at all? Brendan, I don't know,
Yeah,
whoever.
I wasn't too shocked to see it. Obviously, he was quietly. He didn't officially announce it via social media until the following day. We kind of all found out at the same time when the NBA kind of released that list of draft entrants. So I wasn't too terribly shocked, but I also don't think he's really NBA ready yet. I think he'll really benefit from coming back to be Michigan State's leader at the point guard position next season. So, Paul.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the way I view it, the current model where as a college player, if you can declare for the draft and get basically a free interview, which is what this is, right? They're interviewing for a job. And, college kids should interview for jobs. That's a good thing. I think it's great. And I think that that's honestly the way he's kind of looking at it. I mean, the way he sort of snuck his name in without anybody knowing and didn't announce it, it seems more likely than not that he is not super serious about actually getting drafted this year. He's just trying to learn. And that's great. Like, I think more college players could do that if they have the chance. Like, that's great. So yeah, it doesn't really surprise me. I think it's a smart move. And Akins is I don't know if we talked about him specifically, but it's a little different situation. He's got a higher probability of maybe having a team fall in love with him and trying to draft him. I think most people don't think that's going to happen, but it's not. Is it 40-60? Is it 30-70, 20-80? I don't know. But Hogard is, I'd say, 90%, if not higher percentage of coming back next year. Akins not as much, but you never know. I mean, Akins has got the athleticism that can be a deal that can really change the game. But he's also only about 6'3", which is a little more problematic for the NBA.
I think, like, with the
We'll see what
hype that's
happens.
surrounding the team for next year, having that additional feedback from both of them, sorry, will just be an extra piece in Izzo's pocket going forward. And I'm excited to kind of see what shakes out with all of that. Anything else, like, really looking ahead for basketball that you want to say at all?
I think really
Um,
excited.
I'll
Paul, go ahead,
just
Paul.
Oh, I'm still a little upset about the Kansas State loss. I just want to put out there because I think the path was clear to at least get to that final game. I mean, those games would have been toss-ups, and I will forever be slightly hurt by that.
I think that's a correct take, and I would agree. Sometimes, I haven't thought about March Madness for a while, but every now and again when I see anything on Twitter, I'm a little bitter also, so I would agree with that. Anything from you, Brendan?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Michigan State fans have a right to be excited next year for a basketball season. I mean, they got top five recruiting class coming in, a lot of guys coming back, including Tyson Walker, hopefully AJ Hogard, hopefully Jane Akins. Uh, so yeah, the fans have a right to be excited, and yeah, I think I might just copy and paste Paul's March Madness bracket next next March. So if that's good, Paul's giving me the thumbs up, so I might do that.
It'll
Yep.
cost you,
No
but he'll
problem.
let you, don't worry.
Well, we can split some of the money I win from pools. I'll give you a cut.
No problem.
Only other thing I wanted to touch on.
I
Sorry,
will
go ahead,
note that.
Paul. So go ahead.
Well, I'll note that in the what would have been the 22 bracket, I had Kentucky winning the national title, and they got beat by St. Peter's in the first round. So it doesn't always work.
Yeah, probably better than mine though. So I didn't do I didn't do so hot. I picked Houston to win it all. I think they lost Sweet 16, but yeah. So
Mm,
we'll see next year.
there's
Okay, the
always
only
next
other
year.
thing I wanted to say was apparently MSU baseball has been cleaning up these days. I'm not a huge baseball fan, I'll admit that. I only go to watch baseball if there's hot dogs involved. But we have been having some really good coverage on the baseball team on Spartans Illustrated. Do any of you, either of you, have any points about how baseball has been doing? Have you been keeping up on that at all?
Yeah, I will say, Sydney, they do have hot dogs at the baseball game. We'll have to cough up a little bit of change, but they do have
Nice.
hot dogs there. I've been impressed with kind of the bats this year. Brock Friedenberg is big first baseman. I feel like every time I go to a game, he's hitting 2 home runs a game. So he's been really good. They're coming off of a sweep against Northwestern, so I think they're second in the Big Ten right now, which is pretty impressive. So hopefully they can continue that. Uh, I know they probably got to win the Big Ten tournament to make it to the NCAA tournament, but yeah, really exciting time for Michigan State baseball.
And I don't know this for sure, but I feel like they have had a couple low years as of recently. So it's nice to kind of see that pick back up and there be some more hype around that team. Paul, do you have anything to say about that at all? The baseball team?
Not so much. I did get a chance a couple of years ago. I followed them more closely because I wound up the de facto only colors writer for them. So that was kind of my first exposure to Spartan baseball. I haven't followed them as closely, but I still do keep my eye on them a little bit. But I hope they can make the College World Series because that's kind of a fun event. Which that was one of those things that I didn't understand at all like 4 or 5 years ago. And then when I read how the tournament's structured, it's very fascinating to me because I love this. I love the structure of tournaments. So I
Something
hope they
else
make
that
it.
I
It'll be
saw
fun.
that I thought was a positive, MSU baseball's coach was it? I think it was talking about fixing the flooding that always happens on those fields every single year, multiple times. And it seems like I can't remember what his comment was, but it was something like, "This happens all the time, and it shouldn't." And I agree. So that will be exciting if they can figure out something to do with that. I don't really know what they can do, but it seems like all of the time that whole area is completely flooded. So that
Mother
will be
Nature
something.
always wins.
Right. The Red Cedar River is a little
Mhm.
unpredictable, maybe, or very predictable, and they just don't do anything to change it. But whatever. Okay, guys, anything else that you want to say at all? Doesn't have to be baseball related. Anything in general? It's okay if not.
I'm
I'm
all
putting you
good.
on the spot. Just
No,
wanted to
I
make sure. All
I
right.
Thanks for
think we're
having
Well,
good.
thank
us
you.
on.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for joining, and thanks for listening. Please subscribe to Red Cedar Radar. Let me just start over. Please subscribe to Red Cedar Radar wherever you listen, and we'll be back next week for more. Thanks. Bye.